A lot is talked about regarding Elden Ring's lore, but something I very rarely hear about would be some of the psychological elements to these games. So in today's video, I will be going into that. I'm no psychologist, or psychiatrist, or a bloody botanist, so if I mess anything at all up, please let me know, because the last thing I want to be doing is spreading misinformation. Mass hysteria is everywhere in the Lands Between, and quite frankly, after doing some more digging, I'm really baffled how this has not been talked about before, considering how much mass hysteria there is. If that interests you, sit back, relax, grab some popcorn if you want, and enjoy as we discuss the mass hysteria inside of the Lands Between. The definition of mass hysteria goes as follows: a frenzied emotional state that affects a large number of people at the very same time. And we see this all around the Lands Between. There is no better example than the Omens. Mass hysteria is a really tragic and devastating illness. A good example in our world would be the Salem witch trials, and while Urgot was partially the reason, there was also the mass hysteria, which led to the situation we all know of now. And think, in the Lands Between, what species gets the same treatment and worse? What species is subjected to mass hysteria and mania? Why, it's no other than the Omens. The Omens are subjected to the same treatment and worse that the witches were hundreds of years ago in Salem. There is a lot of speculation as to what actually causes mass hysteria, but one thing that has popped up time after time would be stress, and then that stress is refined and multiplied by either hearing about it or seeing it, leading to mass hysteria. But something that stumped me is, what caused this extreme stress in the Lands Between that eventually turned into this mass hysteria? I believe that the Golden Order did. Let me explain. The Omens originated from the primordial pot of the Crucible, something that we are told was a sacred thing in the age of the Crucible. But as the Golden Order rose to power and humanity grew, they were shunned, abused, and forced to become servants and slaves. And while this could be just humanity's cruel nature, I believe there is more to it than that. Change is a hard and difficult thing, so imagine how the inhabitants of the Lands Between must be feeling in this moment. Their whole entire lives uprooted and changed in an instant, removing their brutish ways in favour of a more civilised approach to life. This change must have caused so much stress, so when the Golden Order began whispering of the Crucible's vile nature, is it any wonder that mass hysteria began to writhe, leading to the tragedy that we all know of today? Something that stood out to me a lot would be the perfumers. The perfumers have been around since the beginning of the Golden Order, concocting strange and fascinating potions and perfumes. And while this might at first seem like a wholesome study, in true From Software fashion, this is not the case. From Software's games take a lot of inspiration from our world, in many big and subtle ways. An example of a subtle detail would be Urgot. Given the connection with Salem and the Omens, I thought about Salem and what similarities could exist apart from mass hysteria, and then it finally clicked. So I ended up on this Tolkien tour not too long ago. We went to the area that Tolkien grew up next to, as I live really close to there. Anyway, so we made our way to this mill that Tolkien grew up next to, and the tour guide gave us a bit of explanation to do with something called Urgot. Now, Urgot is a fungal blight that has hallucinogenic properties. And the reason this is important is because Urgot, a few hundred years ago, made its way into wheat and mills and eventually into the bread they produced. The town of Salem was one of the most affected. On a daily basis, almost half of the town ate this Urgot infused bread, leading to hallucinations, which then led to stress, and that stress from the hallucinations caused mass hysteria, and then, well, the Salem witch trials happened. Elden Ring's situation seems to be very similar. First of all, there are some wild and wacky things you can eat in Elden Ring, which could easily have Elden Ring's equivalent of Urgot in them. And then secondly, there are the perfumers. They use all sorts of things to create more and more perfumes, and then when you realise that the first Omen Hunter was a perfumer who used some unknown recipe to numb his emotions, everything clicks into place. Elden Ring's world is not only plagued by mass hysteria, but also mass production of this world's ergot and hallucinogenics, which affects the mind, and then the mind produces the stress, and then they pass on that stress, and then it causes mass hysteria, and then mass hysteria causes all the tragedies that we find in Elden Ring. But the Omens weren't the only ones to suffer this world to ergot and mass hysteria. There was also the windmill people of the Atlas Plateau. These women are puzzling to say the least, frolicking around detached from the outside world. And given that these villages are located right next to the perfumers' settlements, it's kind of hard to imagine they didn't have a hand in their shared mania. In this case though, I believe the mass hysteria came after the hallucinogenic attack. For soon after, a Godskin noble actually arrived, most likely after the defeat of the Glowmite Queen. The Godskin noble, who is by proxy tied to Destined Death and Deathroot, which will be very important in a second. This arrival most likely led to panic, and then from that stress, and then mass hysteria. In my mind, there is no doubt that the perfumers did not have a hand in this, but I also believe that they didn't work independently. The only question is who? Who do they answer to? And sadly, we don't know. We might never know. All we can do is speculate. Perhaps it's Ranni, perhaps it's Rykard, perhaps it's Marika. We don't know. I wish we did, but we just simply don't. Ergot is a fungal blight. What blights live in Elden Ring? Death blights that also have fungal properties, intoxicating those around it. Yes, Dee was mad, but what if constantly being surrounded by hallucinogenics caused him to be like this? Not to mention Maliketh, that he's literally turned into a junkie. I mean, we are constantly badgered to go out and get his next fix. His Deathroot, aka Ergot. Going back to the windmill village, if for some reason the perfumers didn't poison the village, another explanation could be the presence of the Godskin noble, which again is tied to Destined Death and the Death Blights, and their hallucinogenic properties. We do see multiple times these women praying, bowing down to this Godskin noble. Whether that's out of fear or reverence, it isn't really stated. And then there is Miquella. We are actually directly told that Miquella uses the bewitching branches to intoxicate and indoctrinate most of his followers. The bewitching branches produce some type of gas. Who also uses gas in their incantations? Perfumers. Perhaps Miquella had some help developing this certain incantation. The question again though is, who? Mass hysteria is a real tragic and heart-wrenching disease. Add ergot and toxic hallucinogenics on top of that, and you've got a really bad time ahead of you. Perhaps in the DLC we might get some more info on all this, considering Miquella is also responsible for another pocket of mass hysteria and hallucinogenics. Sadly everyone, that is the end of the video. If you did enjoy, please consider leaving a like and subscribe, as it greatly helps the channel. If you didn't enjoy the video, please let me know down below in the comments what you found wrong about the video so I can improve for the next one. Anyways, some of my other videos should be popping up on the screen right now, and I hopefully see you all in the next one. May you all find your worth in the waking world, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Goodbye everyone.